The woods around Falcon Lake do not feel like a place where anything should happen. Just granite, pine, and a silence that makes every small sound feel too loud. It is May 20th, 1967, a spring weekend where the light looks clean and ordinary, the kind of day that makes you trust the world. Stefan Michalak is out here alone, a mechanic by trade, an amateur prospector by obsession, chasing the quiet logic of stone and mineral. He is not hunting monsters, he is hunting quartz and silver, the kind of hobby that rewards patience more than luck. He works for hours, methodical, the way mechanics do, and when he stops for lunch, the forest stays still, like it is holding its breath. Then the geese react first, not gently, but like something just crossed the boundary they trusted. He looks up and sees two bright objects descending, glowing hard against the daylight, bright enough to make his eyes want to squint. In his account, the objects shift and shimmer as they come down, as if the light around them cannot decide what color to be. One of them pulls away and disappears, clean and fast, like it never needed the air in the first place. The second keeps dropping until it is close enough to feel real, close enough to stop being a sighting and become a presence. Michalak says it comes down on a rocky outcrop, roughly 50 meters away, not hidden, not cautious, just there. He does not run, which is the first detail that makes this story unsettling, because fear usually moves the body before the mind decides. He approaches like a man approaching machinery, not worshiping, not screaming, trying to understand what he is seeing. He later describes a stainless steel-like surface, smooth, with a kind of clean metallic sheen that makes it look manufactured. He notices sound, a hum, and a smell he compares to something sulfurous, like hot machinery and wrong air. There is an opening, bright inside, bright enough that he uses protective goggles, the same kind of practical decision you make around welding art. He says he hears voices, muffled human enough to make him believe this is not a ghost story, but a craft with people inside. He calls out, offering help the way a mechanic does when something looks broken, because fixing is his default language. He tries again, and in retellings, he is said to have tried multiple languages, reaching for anything that might make a response happen. No one answers, and that silence changes the temperature of the moment, because silence is what turns curiosity into threat. He says panels slide shut over the opening, not violently, but decisively, like a machine sealing itself. He reaches out and touches the surface, and the heat is immediate, enough to melt the tips of his glove. Then the craft begins to rotate, counterclockwise in his description, bringing a section of holes or vents into view. He describes the vent as a grid of small circular openings, a detail that later becomes one of the signature images of the case. Without warning, he says a blast hits him, hot air or gas, strong enough to drive him back and set his clothing alight. He tears at his shirt and cap, trying to get burning fabric off skin. Pure instinct, no mystery, just survival. When he looks up again, the craft lifts away, and the clearing is suddenly just a clearing again. But he is not the same person who walked into it. He staggers through the bush, disoriented, nauseated, vomiting as he goes, a man trying to find the world he left behind. This is where the story splits into two realities, the strange moment in the woods, and the long aftermath that drags it into paperwork. Later that day, he flags down a patrol officer on the highway, telling him he has been burned and warning him not to come too close. Early reports note the officer's skepticism, the way authority often reacts to the unbelievable by reaching for the simplest explanation. That same night, Michalak seeks medical help for burns, turning the encounter into a medical event, not just a story. In the days after, he remains ill, and illness is a cruel kind of evidence because it is real, but it does not explain itself. News spreads fast, and suddenly, the quiet case has headlights on it, reporters, phone calls, curiosity that does not knock. His family later describes the pressure as relentless. Strangers calling, media arriving, their home turning into a stage without consent. The investigation begins, and this is another reason the Falcon Lake incident endures, because it is not just a tale, it is a file. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police takes statements, and the Royal Canadian Air Force becomes involved, which is not common for ordinary rumors. 3 days after the incident, investigators come to his home and record his account while he appears visibly unwell. He cannot immediately guide them back to the site, not because he refuses, but because his condition and timing do not line up with investigative urgency. The military had procedures for UFO reports even before this incident. Forms and questions designed to catch patterns in the strange. On paper, it looks controlled. Date, time, sky conditions, observer identity. But the woods do not care about forms. A search is mounted, aerial and ground, and they find some items he had mentioned. But the exact landing spot proves harder to pin down. That gap becomes important later, because when a scene is not preserved, every future argument has room to breathe. Michalak later returns to the area on his own, and that choice creates another fracture, because evidence without strict chain of custody becomes a battlefield. Soil and small fragments become part of the story, with reports of low-level radioactivity in some materials and debate over contamination. A federal radiation expert is brought in, testing not just the site, but looking for mundane roots of contamination in the city, workplaces, medical sources. The results do not produce a clean answer, not enough to shut down a park, not enough to prove a craft, just enough to keep the question alive. Some samples remain controversial because their origin cannot be fully verified, and that is the kind of uncertainty that never goes away. Skeptical explanations gain ground here, including the idea that radium-based luminous paint could account for traces on certain items. Others point to inconsistencies and human factors, memory distortion, stress, the way trauma makes the mind cling to certain shapes. One official theory raised at the time suggested alcohol could have played a role, hallucination by hangover, a tidy narrative that some investigators chased. The family disputes that strongly, and investigators did not confirm a simple, drunken explanation as a solution to the whole event. What Michalak himself emphasized later is also striking. He did not insist it was aliens. He leaned toward something man-made but unknown. That detail matters because it changes the story from cosmic to terrestrial, from invasion to secrecy, from folklore to Cold War shadow. In Canada, one obvious reference point for a disc-shaped machine is the Evercar concept, a real attempt at vertical lift, even if it never matured into what people dream it was. Whether Evercar is relevant or not, the point is that the era was full of prototypes, ideas that could shock a witness without ever becoming public. But prototypes do not usually leave a man sick for weeks, and this is where the medical side refuses to let the story stay simple. Accounts describe nausea, headaches, weakness, weight loss, and blood work that concern doctors enough to keep watching him. The burns become the most replayed image, including descriptions of a grid-like pattern. But even here, records and retellings vary over time. That variability is uncomfortable, but it is also honest, because real cases are messy, and messy does not mean false, it means human. What does not vary is that investigators took it seriously enough to document it extensively, and those documents exist, preserved in the National Archive. That is why this case still breathes, because it is not only told, it is stored, and storage gives a story weight. Years pass, and the case becomes part of culture, the kind of mystery you can buy a souvenir for, which is both absurd and revealing. The story becomes known as Canada's Roswell, not because it matches Roswell, but because every country eventually collects a mystery that refuses to die. In 2018, even the Royal Canadian Mint commemorated the incident, framing it as a national story of unexplained phenomena. When a country mints your mystery, it does not prove it, but it proves that the story has entered the permanent record of curiosity. So, what are we left with? A man, an injury, a location, an investigation, and no final answer that satisfies every detail. One lane says secret craft, dangerous exhaust, a test run too close to civilians, then silence and distance after. Another lane says misinterpretation, stress, contamination, and a story that hardened as attention grew and memory tried to keep up. A third lane says hoax, But a hoax has to explain the illness, the burns, the paperwork, and the fact that he held the line for years under scrutiny. The truth might be one lane, or a collision of lanes, a real event wrapped in distortion, or a mundane cause wrapped in trauma. And that is why Falcon Lake is still useful, because it shows how mystery survives best when it has both flesh and files. If you ever visit Whiteshell, the air will not tell you what happened. The rocks will not confess, and the trees will stand like they always did. But you will feel the shape of the question, because questions live longer than answers when answers never arrive. Somewhere between the geese taking flight and the glove melting at the fingertips, something happened to Stefan Michalak that day. Whether it was extraordinary or explainable, the case remains one of the most documented, unexplained encounters in Canada, precisely because no one could lock it down. And maybe that is the most unsettling part, that the world can produce a moment that leaves scars and paperwork and still refuse to explain itself. So, if you had been there, what detail would you trust most? The geese, the glow, the vent grid, the burns, or the fact that official investigators kept returning to it? This is Falcon Lake, 1967, and the case does not ask you to believe in aliens. It only asks you to admit there are days that do not fit.